Hi, everybody. Welcome to our second author talk. Um, Today, we're going to be talking about Sharon Lee de la Cruz's book, I'm a Wild Seed. It's her graphic memoir. Um, and I'm going to read the little blurb on the back so y'all get a sense of what the book is about. From her childhood crush on Xena, the warrior princess, to her first foray in a lesbian bar, from the harm of racist and patriarchal systems to the solace found in an Orisha dance class, Sharon Lee de la Cruz gives us a thought provoking reflection on the ways in which oppression caused her late bloom into queerness. And she invites us to discover the things that have informed one woman's conception of freedom. So, welcome, Sharon.
Hello. I'm sorry.
Hello.
You're probably going to hear my dog who is crying to come into the room because she hates locked doors.
That
Closed-
was the thing with
Yes,
my dog. I can't leave him outside or else he'll
yes,
cry, and so
yes.
he'll bark. So we're on the same page.
We're on the same wave. So I actually, just one second. I think I'm just going to let her in
Yeah, take
because
your
it just
time.
looks
You're
a
good.
hot mess if we
Of
don't.
course. Yeah.
Yay, technology. Let me open this. Okay, okay, okay. All right. Oh my gosh. Oh my
We got to take care of our pets.
gosh. Oh,
Oh it's a puppy. Is she a puppy?
well, she's 4 years old,
Oh
so
my
I'm
goodness.
glad
This
she got to be
small.
a part of this, and she just wanted to say hi. Oh, okay.
This is so
Yes, yes, say hi. Say hi to the people. Okay. All right.
Oh my gosh.
This is just
That
the
is so great.
okay. Okay, so you're gonna stop. You're gonna stop now. All right, girl. Okay. All right.
Oh, I love it. What is her name for everybody in the
Yes,
audience
yes.
right
This
now?
is this is Gordita, aka
Of course.
Gordies, aka the best. Oh, and she's a little, yeah, she's a little trauma. She's a little shelter dog, right? But
Oh,
our trauma define us. But this is our little babe. So we have yeah, thank you. So this is Gordita, and then Lennox shows up in the comic.
yes, your cat.
Yes. Okay.
I
All
did
right. We're gonna
I
let
did
you
not
go.
know you had a dog.
Yes. Yes. All right. Let's let you go. Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, it was nice to meet you, Gordita.
Okay. Good girl. Good girl. Now you can go. All right. All right. That's all she needed. She just needed some loving.
She
She
just
just
needed some love,
she just needed some
reassurance.
love. That's
We
all.
all need reassurance.
Right. Right. No.
Oh my goodness, I shed a little tear. That was so
Oh
precious and
yes.
adorable. And I'm
And
glad
unplanned.
Gordita. What
Unplanned.
was that?
Unplanned.
Yes, it was unplanned. Well, that's good 'cause, if you saw, like, folks' comments pop up on the left-hand side of the screen,
Yes.
in the end, I'll, like, open up a Q&A sort of thing so that if folks in the audience want to ask you a question, they'll pop up here, and then I can also see them in the private chat. So if we miss any, I'll have, like, a archive of them, basically. Um, but yeah, thank you so much for being with us here today. We just read your beautiful book, your debut book, and it was incredible. It was a hit. Everybody in book club loved it. So yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit about the inspiration of this book? You sort of mention it in the first like 3 pages or so of
Yeah.
this book that this book was inspired by an event. Do you wanna tell us what inspired you?
Yeah, so I happen to have really great friends who have really amazing questions to ask all the time. And
Love that.
my friend JV and I went out to dinner, and super cash. She just asked what um, what freedom looked like, or like what freedom meant and looked like for me as a BIPOC queer person. And immediately, like I shouted, when like Black trans women are free. And although I had never been asked that question, and definitely not phrased in that way, I knew the answer immediately. And it shocked me, to be honest, because it just came so natural. Um, and I knew I needed to explain, because, and I make it very clear, and in all the interviews that I do make it clear, I am not a Black trans woman, right? So I will not speak for that experience. But what I think is really awesome is that our freedom doesn't have to be contingent and can be contingent on another person's identity. So like what does that mean, especially when we think about community, right? When we think about a collective freedom rather than like what for me was sold, what was sold to me as a little kid, which was like this like very American capitalistic, like individualistic sense of freedom, right?
Mhm.
And that's freedom. And as I grew up, understanding and really rewriting and rewiring, right, for myself, what freedom looks like, and that it may not be my particular identity that's the ultimate freedom. Like, what is ultimate freedom? And then understanding patriarchy, whatevs, right? Understanding patriarchy, understanding how our most vulnerable, um, we're only, and it's, I hate the phrase like, we're only as strong as our weakest link. It's like, no, it's like, we're only as safe as we make our most vulnerable, right? And
Mhm.
so if our most vulnerable, being Black trans women, are not safe, um, that means I'm not safe, right?
Mhm.
Overall. So really understanding that for myself, and it took rewiring. This isn't just like I naturally woke up like this, right? Like it's a rewiring of understanding and an unlearning of like this like very like white cis um understanding of success,
Mhm.
community, and freedom overall.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the term, "we're only as weak or we're only as strong as our weakest link" is, like, the capitalist term,
Right,
and
right,
when we're talking about, like,
right,
community, we're
right,
like, "This is collective," you
right,
know? Like, it's
right,
not about,
right.
like, making money or, like, producing something, it's about protecting all of
Yes,
us. So I feel like that term, like, "We're not free until Black trans women are free," is, like, it's like a herd, you know? Like, this is our most vulnerable. We're not gonna be safe until those people are safe.
right, right.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, I'm super happy that you have, like, friends who are asking you these, like, like, in a casual
Super
setting, like,
cash.
these
Yeah,
thought-provoking, questions. Those are incredible friends to have.
for sure.
Um, yeah, so did you, imagine this book well, first of all, did you imagine yourself being an author at all? Like, I know you went to school for STEM, was am I correct with that? You're
Well,
also an artist.
so I went to undergrad at Cooper Union, and that was like super fine arts, and I did a lot of like
Mhm,
weird video art shit there.
mhm,
And then in graduate school, it was like art and technology. So no, I have no formal background in comics, but in graduate school, I started to explore it more seriously.
mm,
Just like having the space to create, right? And like what naturally comes out of you. And so, and always had a thing about comics in that like I grew up with like my brother always like controlling the remote control, you know what I mean? Like the TV. So I was like
mhm,
forced into like Spider-Man, the animated series, forced into like X-Men, the animated series, forced into like, the super like hyper hero, Marvel, whatever, which I now love. You know what I mean?
mhm,
However, I'm not a fan necessarily of like writing superhero type comics, right? Like, so that was
mhm,
never attractive to me. Although, like, comics itself were attractive, I associated comics with like hero, right? Like with Marvel.
mhm.
Uh,
Right.
so like it just like wasn't attractive to me. And then when I picked up Persepolis, I realized, oh, I can do this with comics.
Mhm.
Thank you.
That book was incredible.
It's
Yeah,
like it's on
incredible.
fire. It's like it's so, and I read like everything Mary Jane Streppy like has written. I'm like, yes, please and thank you. She's
Yeah.
brilliant. So, that's when I realized, oh, this is what I've been looking for, right? This like uh I think, so maybe my friends will tell me different, but I think I'm a funny storyteller, like orator, and so like I've developed that gift since I was younger, right? Like being able to like tell these like ridiculous stories and just kind of like make up these stories. Um,
Mhm.
and so translating that, like, comics to me feels very similar. And then it
Mhm.
uses what I love the most, which is like drawing, right? And art making. But it is also, what I really love about it is that it's also challenging, right? It's not this like, for me, it's not this thing that comes natural, right?
Mhm.
It's this thing where I have to think about story. I have to think about words, which I had historically made myself believe that I was like not a good writer, right?
Mm.
So dealing with that, like that kind of like background, and then thinking through like, but I really love images, and I really love what they can do together, like text and images together, and putting those two things together, especially to think through these like complicated things, like that my freedom depended on, like Black trans women.
Mhm.
How do I explain that to someone? And the what I can one of my superpowers is the art making, right? Like I can draw. So I was like, well, that makes a lot of sense. And I love to tell stories. So it all just like made sense,
Mhm.
even in its challenge, right? Like even though I do think it's like really challenging to make comics, I enjoy it for the obvious challenge, and I stay because the community, the like BIPOC queer comics community is like on fire. They're
Mhm.
really great. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like graphic memoirs like I'm a Wild Seed or just like any graphic novel opens up like a door for people who don't like to read novels. It's like I don't know, it just feels more fun. Like I was not much of a graphic novel person, but I've been really getting into them and like this was like a really great example for someone who wants to like learn about hard topics, like the topics that you covered in your book, but kind of have like a little bit I don't want to say like lighter, but like because of like the beautiful art and your book is so vibrantly colored, it like makes it a little bit easier to digest, I guess, if
yeah,
that you
yeah.
know?
It,
Yeah.
yeah, and honestly, it's about intersectionally explaining things, right? Like, and so that means that it's not that it's more complicated, but there are more factors
Mhm.
that you have to take into consideration, which means more care, which means a little more, you have to slow down a little bit, to think about how these different intersections, these different identities are in concert together, right? They
Mhm.
shouldn't be like, oh, this identity stays here and then this one stays here. Although I think, in the book I hit on, for most of my life, I had to prioritize the race part of my identity because it was a lot of grappling between like what that meant for me. And that was like, I mean, it was such a big deal in my household and so suffocating to try to understand what that meant. And it was only until, like undergrad and graduate school, to be quite frank, which are like two historically white institutions, that I had the space to try to figure out exactly what that meant and how that
Mhm.
informed me.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so this comic oops, I just did something weird. Was originally a zine, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And you got it published through Street Noise, I think it is?
yeah,
Yeah, Street Noise published it. What was what was
yeah.
like the transition from zine to published book like for
It
you?
was so hard. Well, one shout out to Liz Francis, who is the founder of Street Noise and who believed in me enough to say, "Hey, you want to create a long form comic?" And then I was silly enough to say yes. I, you know, I until I'm a Wild Seed, I was making short form zines, a lot of like online short form stuff, right? Like Instagram is like
Mhm.
perfect for like zine, for comics making. So I this is my first time and it was fucking hard, for several reasons. One is because, all of a sudden you're guiding someone through a story, right? That
Mhm.
like has a beginning, has a middle, has an end, right? In this
Typically.
way, but also most of the like what I learned with I'm a Wild Seed, and I think, you know, it's mighty, but it's small, right? And
Mhm.
I feel like each chapter could honestly just be its own book if we like
Mhm.
really fleshed it out, right? Um,
Absolutely.
so, but for me, it was while creating this book, I was literally thinking through all of this. This wasn't the like, I am completely sure of all the things. I've got it all covered. Now I would just make a 95-page book about it, right? Like this was me like really trying to like get these stories out of my head, make them make sense, right? Make
Mhm.
them transition in a way that like brought people through experiences, but then also like low key re traumatizing myself, right? Because you don't think about these, like, these are memories, these are things that happen, cool. And then when you have to like sit down and organize your thoughts and kind of like organize and sift through memory, right? Like sift through 35 years of memory, right? And
Mhm.
say, wait, why did I think this thing? Or how did I do that thing? Or like, what did that make me feel like? You're re entering, your body's re entering all of those feelings. And it was hard. It was hard.
Yeah.
I tell folks all the time, I'm like, look, I love the process of art making as therapeutic, but the art itself is not therapy to me.
Mhm.
That's why I go to my therapist, like, but but the process should feel good, right? Like, it
Yeah.
should be something that should feel like alleviating or like feel good, right? In that, in and feel some sense of like clarity in the thing, in the making of the thing. But is it my therapy? No. Um,
Yeah.
and so with memoir and with this particular memoir, it was really hard because I was coming out to my family and everyone else with this book. This was not
Oh.
like I had a conversation with my family first and they knew, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, they knew I was like dating a woman, cool, but the extent of what
Mhm.
the book talks about, like literally my sister knew this when you were reading this, right? Like y'all read this at the same time. So and these are not conversations that I have in my household daily, right? I may have this with my awesome friends, right? Like
Mhm.
household, especially growing up, very different. So that was super vulnerable, right? And
Yeah.
you put yourself in this vulnerable position. I put myself in this vulnerable position, but it was only until it was a real book that you could buy online that I was like, "Ooh, ooh, I hope," and then, but before that, I was thinking through, how do I protect all of these characters in this book? Because although they're funny, and they're like, it's a comic, these are all real people I know, right? And
Mhm.
love. And so even in their faultiness or even in, our like intimate conversations, I wanted to make sure that I wanted to make sure that it was apparent that these characters were not one dimensional, that there's
Mhm.
more to these characters. And in particular, being very careful about my mom
Mm.
in these stories, right? Like, she did the butt fucking best damn thing she could,
Yeah.
and I honor for that. I honor her for that, and I love her for that. But also I could talk about my truth in the same way, right? Like they don't have to be these binaries. They can be, this like wonderful little mess in the middle, and we can talk
Yeah.
all about it. So I really tried to work hard on that piece, on how do I create three-dimensional characters that even in their messiness, you can say, "Oof, I know that person," or I understand that."
Well, as someone who read it, I thoroughly related to your relationship with your family about not talking about it.
Yes.
Um, Also coming from a Latina household, um, we don't talk about it. And, you know, I saw my mom in your mom. So you did a wonderful job of
Thank
making these people 3D.
you. Yeah.
Um, Your title, I'm a Wild Seed. Wild Seed is highlighted, and
Yeah.
I can't help but ask if it has anything to do with Octavia Butler's book, Wild Seed. And
Yeah.
honestly, I've never read Wild Seed by Octavia Butler. It's on my to read list, but was there a little bit of inspiration from Butler's?
See it. Hold on. Yeah. So my knuckles say,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, because I fucking love Octavia Butler.
Yes.
That book, hands down, I never thought I would say this, but that book is literally one of my fucking favorite books. And it's not that I directly took things from the book or directly like
Mhm.
inspired by like characters in this book, but rather the like one, I'm inspired by Octavia's storytelling period, right? Like that, just the world that she's able to manifest, right? Is
Mhm.
like one of my hashtag goals, right? Is to be able to write up worlds the way she does that. But two, the reason why I wrote like I'm a Wild Seed is when I read I'm a Wild Seed, it was the first time I felt seen
Mhm.
in a book. And I literally had to look through the copyright, and I think the copyright actually might have been, I can't remember when it was copywritten, or at least like the first time, the first edition. But I had to look through the copyright because I was like, who is this woman? Why is she writing about me? This is really beautiful. It was the first time I heard um or read about the enslaved person's journey in the Americas in a way that did not water down any trauma. However, coupled this with like just a hell of a lot of like rooted, real magic, earthly magic slash optimism. And I was like, oh no, this woman, that's the what, like this is the goal, right? And it was the first
Mhm.
time I felt seen because it talked about like the magic that shows up. I mean, and I think like the Earthseed, books, period, is very rooted in like Santeria and like, in the Black diaspora. That shit is real, right? This is
Mhm.
not like I'm picking a rabbit out of a hat magic. This
Yeah.
is like some real magic. And this is the magic that I grew up with, right? And so just seeing that reflected in this book and just the, in the, c- character that she was able to build in the main character and the like the idiosyncrasies of like strength, I think all over this book, but particularly in the main character, to me was just so beautiful. And after reading that book, I was like, oh, this is the type of strength I'm talking about, right? It's not
Mhm.
just like picking up something heavy, but there's just like so emotionally just a lot of yeah, she just builds 3D characters, right? Just like really beautifully, but also the fact that she talked about this like really rooted real magic in conjunction with the journey of an enslaved person. I was like, oh man, like the trauma is there, right? Like you're not watering that down, but that's not all of it, right? That's not all of
Mhm.
the experience. There's like there's magic in people, right? And like and making almost like making the magic a character in itself and a
Mm.
centerpiece in her storytelling. And I was just in awe. And so then I just read a whole bunch of her books. It was like, you, my friend, are amazing. And so that's been the kingship I feel, I think, with Octavia. And in the same way, too, I was influenced by Zami, by Audre Lorde Zami, and the idea of like biomythography, still playing around with biomythography, because I also do feel like that the genre of biomythography makes a lot more sense to how I tell stories anyway.
Mm.
So both of these folks for sure are like winners and like,
Beautiful.
yeah, amazing women.
That makes sense with the little, like, symbolism. Like, I'm picturing, like, these little, like,
Yeah,
if y'all could see, like, as magic, like, these
yeah, yeah, yeah.
little or, like, roots
Right,
almost,
roots,
so
right.
that makes total sense. Yeah, I have to pick up that book for sure. I don't know why it's taking me so
Yeah,
long,
yeah.
but it is on
But
my to-read
it's
list.
when you're ready and you sit down with that book
That
and,
is true.
"Oh, this
That
was,"
is true.
I knew about this book, and in fact, a friend of mine had tried to convince me to read this book, like, a couple years earlier, and I was like, "No, I'm not into sci-fi."
Mhm.
I was
Yeah,
like,
that's what I say.
yeah, I was like, "That's not my thing," and then when you
Mhm.
read this, you're like, oh, that's why you think of mother sci-fi. Like, this is sci-fi. This makes a lot of sense. Like, in the
Yes.
same way that when I picked up Persepolis, it's like, oh, this is comics.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, you gotta be ready to receive the message that you're about to
Yeah.
like, even without knowing that you're about to, like, embark on this journey,
Yeah.
your body's like, "I just gotta be ready."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Let me look at alright, let's talk about, like, the contents in the book, just some. We'll talk about your queer awakening. This book is, about how you came into your queerness late as, an adult, and you were 29, right, was it?
Yeah, it was something like 29, yeah.
Yeah, which I feel like isn't that late. I feel like in the queer community, we talk a lot about, um, like, coming out late, and I mean, maybe it's not my experience, so maybe it's, like, a different, um, experience for, like, someone like you. Um Yep, my train of thought just left. What was the question? Well, could you talk to us a little bit about, like, coming out later in life and
Yeah,
what
one is, like, now that I've had these conversations multiple times with folks, I feel like even the language of coming out late, right now, I kind of like want to rewrite that a little bit too. It's like, well, you're coming. One is like, I didn't come out, I came in too,
Ye
right? All those feelings
yeah,
are
and,
there.
like, when is late? Like
Right, right. And that's not right. And but I do feel like all of a sudden I was a little more clear and I was like, oh
mhm,
wait, I must explore this thing. It's so late. I'm
mhm,
so late. I've done all of these things and one, yeah, it is silly that it's late, but there is a sense of urgency to like understand yourself, right? When you
mhm,
finally feel just even that much more comfortable with yourself. And and coming into your queerness means like finding those queer safe spaces, right?
mhm,
To be in, so you feel like this sense of urgency is like, oh wait, what did I do? Because it's a whole culture, right? Like you're like, oh, what what did I get? What am I missing? It felt like I was missing something.
yeah,
And so it was, I always speak about it like not coming out, coming in. But yes, there
mhm,
was a sense of urgency because at that time I was like, oh, wait a minute. Hold up. This is a whole thing. And now I must figure out what this other thing is. Uh,
yeah.
because I have no idea what it was. And half of it is already there. 'Cause
Yeah, I mean, you talked about, like, you have a chapter about Xena and how when you were younger, you watched Xena and you were like, "Oh, so it was there," but and you talk about your like, about this in your book as well, that, like, there's so much suppressing, like, all of this, like, non-cis,
yeah,
hetero, white, that it's hard for you to sort of, like, be like, realize yourself,
yeah,
right?
right. Right. Yeah. And,
Um,
and just kind of like what is actually making you happy? I mean, and then this world is so crazy, right? Like this world's so crazy.
yes, it is.
When do when do you actually, to be honest, a privilege, right? Like the privilege to like be able to like even just like think about yourself,
Mm,
at least I felt like for me it was a privilege, so I'll keep speaking in the eye because for me I felt like it was a privilege. I needed like the time to be in study to like understand why why was I attracted to certain things, why I was attracted to the civil rights movement, right? Like, why was I attracted to just like certain historical events, notions, and I had to, and it was these institutions that helped me think through it, even in their short.
sorry. When
Mhm.
you say in study, you mean in school?
Yeah, in school. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah,
just
in
making sure.
school. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So like in school, I had to, it was the privilege to just to try to understand again, not just like take it in, but like feel it and say, okay, what does this mean to this Black body today?
Mm,
What does that look like?
mhm. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it definitely is a privilege to think about oneself, you have to be in, like, a sort of, uh, not like mentally stable, but like it's just hard, you know? It's easier to not think about yourself, and it's easier to just like go with the flow and like go with the norm, and it's difficult to self-reflect, you know? Like
Yeah. And it's also
it's
what did
hard.
James Baldwin say? Shit, I don't want to butcher James Baldwin, but just to like to be in this in the United States, like as a Black person, is to kind of to like live in rage, right?
Mm,
Um, and who the fuck wants to live in rage all the time,
it's exhausting.
right? It's fucking exhausting.
It's
So,
exhausting.
what does that mean when you find that rage? Where does it go? How are you expressing that? How do you just not melt, right?
Mm,
How do you just not melt, right? When you realize, like the FBI killed X, you know what I mean? Like, how do you not fucking melt? Uh,
yeah.
so, yes, it is to be enraged. And what I am saying is that to be enraged to me is just this different side of the same coin of being happy, right? Like I believe in joyful resistance. And I
Mhm.
believe that joy is the path to resistance. But there's a real thing about like not ignoring that rage and of being angry. And sometimes that does not show up as joy. Because guess what? You deserve to fucking be angry. There's a lot to be angry. The Supreme Court today made me
Absolutely.
very angry, right? Um, there's so much to be angry about. So even though like I advocate for joyful resistance, I'm very aware that sometimes that shit just shows up as anger. Uh,
Mhm.
and just trying to be present in that, I think, has been fruitful to me so that I can work through how am I helping this movement? How am I freeing us with my art? Like, is my art doing anything to free us, to get us to think through these hard things, and be actionable about it, right?
Mm,
Not just think through them, but be actionable.
absolutely. Yeah. Um, yeah, I feel like rage is such a I mean, joyfulness is a strong emotion, but like rage really propels people to take action, you know? And then like within community, we can feel joy or we can celebrate a small victory.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, you're right. Like it has rage can be an ugly emotion, but also a driving emotion,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And not to
Yeah.
be ignored, not to be suppressed, but to work with.
Mhm. Absolutely. Um, speaking of working with, let's talk about your queer friends that you
Yeah.
mentioned just now, but also your queer friends that you've mentioned in the book. You talk about when you first came out, you have this friend who took you to a cubbyhole, and this will sort of touch on the topic of like safe spaces as well. You were not feeling cubbyhole when you first went, and why was that? Was that just not your community? Like, did you not feel like it was a safe space for you? Are you the type of person who doesn't like loud and late night and like alcoholic centered
So you're
space?
speaking to, well, look, you're speaking to 35-year-old Sharon, who's like una viejita, you know what I mean? Like
Uh,
my soul is like a little woman now. So no,
I'm
35-year-old
24
Sharon
and
right now is like not a fan of like fucking, like loud ass music. And I don't drink anymore. So, it doesn't, I'm not like attracted particularly to bars. Although I must say that yesterday I went to a local bar to pick up some food and it wasn't ready yet. And my partner and I went inside and I looked at her and I was like, I forgot how good bars smell. It was the
oh,
bar.
really? What
Yeah, it
did
was
it smell like?
bar smell. And I was like, I mean, it was kind of like it's beer, like it just smells like
Oh,
beer.
okay.
And I was like, oh, that's nostalgic. And like literally I just have like
Aw,
nostalgic. Like, I just felt nostalgic because I was like,
yeah,
oh, okay, this is, like I've had fun in these places before. So 35-year-old Sharon right now is like probably not about that life. Although I am about the like, we found safe spaces, for example. And okay, I don't drink, sure, but it doesn't mean that I can't be in places that serve alcohol, whatever,
absolutely.
So
Mhm.
like fine. no problem. But I feel like I found spaces, like I really enjoy what Poppy Juice does for the culture, which is like these group of fabulous folks who've come together and they basically throw parties, but they're a whole movement. But anyway, and so they throw parties, I think like all over the US at this point, at least like bi-coastal at this point, but they're based in New York City and they just throw the most amazing queer parties. And they have a whole just like kind of what is it, like community etiquette or community what is it called? Oh, I think it's like a community agreements for these,
Okay.
and they
Okay.
and in each event that they throw, they put that as part of the flyer. Like, here are the community agreements. Here we're
Like if you show up, you agree to this stuff is
yeah,
what
you
they're
agree to this
saying.
stuff, which is not
Mhm.
the like haggling, the blah blah, you know what I mean? The like there needs to be consent in here. So it to me has been, I love what they've done for nightlife, right? Like I love what they've done for partying, you know what I mean? And
Mhm.
I love what they've done for just being able to enjoy yourself freely, in ways that historically when I did that when I was younger, like did not have those, there was no consent, right? Like people would just pull you. What the hell is that?
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So like I'm just glad that folks are thinking about safe spaces in more transparent ways, right? Like not to be assumed.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I think, with the, like, onset of COVID and places being like, if you're
Mhm.
going to this party, you have to either, like, show a negative test. I
Right.
think that really, like, helped bring out, um, like, like a guide that everybody can
I
follow
mean, it's
and
called
to make
fucking
sure we're
consent.
all
Yeah, it's called fucking consent. Consent does not
yeah,
need to be, it's not mutually exclusive to sexual consent. Consent is all
absolutely.
around, right? Like consent is every day.
Mhm.
And so one of the silver linings, you're right, of this pandemic is that we've been forced in the best way possible to practice consent in
Mhm.
non-sexual interactions, which then, I mean, I'm hoping that it stays for the culture, like then should translate to sexual encounters where you're asking someone, "Hey, do you feel safe if I do this? Hey, can I touch you this way?" Right?
Mhm.
And that safe is fucking sexy as hell, right? Because then you're not worried about a fucking billion things. And then also, one of the things that I love, and maybe I'll hit on this in another book, is that consent doesn't look one way, right? That there's it's an agreement, but the agreement can be choke me, right?
Mm.
The agreement can also be don't fucking choke me, right? Like,
Mhm.
but it's called, right, like it's called communication between,
Yeah, like, it doesn't have to be, like, a direct question. It could be
right.
like yeah, I totally understand that. I used to work for a sex shop in New York City, Babeland, you're probably familiar with
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
And I would teach, like, sex ed classes for adults, and one of the biggest things was talking about consent and how it doesn't always have to, like, ruin everything. It's just communication, like, we're
Yes.
all adults, you know? It can be anything, you know?
Right,
But
right.
I feel like as a culture, we're sort of moving away from like, I feel like the most toxic culture was, like, 90s and before. We're like and then now, we're, like, growing sort of,
Yeah.
slowly, but we are
The 90s are such
towards
a disaster. It's
a
crazy.
disaster. Disaster. But that does not stop me from watching all the 90s
That's what I'm
rom-coms.
saying. That's why I'm like, it was such a fucking like disaster and slash bring it, like bring back the good parts, you know what I mean? But with the consent. Maybe we could just,
Yeah,
maybe it's just a remix, we bring
yeah.
back,
A remix. Yeah, hopefully Gen Z will do that
I
for
know.
us. Already bought back the fashion.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Okay, let's get back on topic because I will talk about 90s movies
Yes.
forever.
Yeah.
Um, let's talk about so we talked about safe spaces.
Yes.
You also talked about this well, first I'll ask you this. First I'll set it up. Sorry, I'm like all
No,
over
no.
the place. I'll set you up. So, in your book, you talk about this, this theory, and it's Dr. Harris Perry's crooked room theory. And this might sound irrelevant to other people, but I think it's very, very relevant. Can you explain to us what that theory is and how it relates to your book?
Yes. So I'm actually going to read verbatim from something that explains it way better than I would be able to. So I'll read verbatim and then I'll talk about what that means for me and yeah, what that meant for me. So I'll
Mhm.
start here. The basis of Harris Perry's book, Sister Citizen, which is what I read, surrounds ideas of field dependency, an area of cognitive psychology, sociology studies. More specifically, Harris Perry refers to a study known as the crooked room. In this experiment, a subject enters a quote crooked room and sits down in a quote crooked chair and is instructed to adjust themselves until they are aligned perpendicular to the room. While some subjects displayed field dependency and were able to straighten themselves despite their crooked surroundings, others would show examples of field dependency and try to align themselves with their surroundings, sometimes to the extent of tilting their bodies to an extreme 35 degrees. Harris Perry uses a study as an example of the way in which people will unconsciously distort themselves to their surroundings. So this was like literally, I'm aligning myself to crooked things around. And the way she talks about it in Sister Citizen is literally we are seeing these images of ourselves or we're being told that we're welfare queens. And although you don't believe it, you align because of field dependency. And so even if
Mhm.
it is not a literal thing, it's a bombardment of information, of things that are being thrown at you, lies that are being thrown at you that you start to adjust to, right? Like start to
Mhm.
align with. And so I thought that was a really brilliant connection. And so when I saw that, to me, it really resonated, especially with the idea of freedom, right? And the idea of success. I was sold an idea of success that's so capitalistic, right? That's so individual, that did not care for my fellow human being, right? Like that did not care who I had to stomp over, who I had to fight, right? Like who I had to like kick to the side because it was about me.
Mhm.
And that's what I had aligned myself. I had aligned myself that like I needed to own a house and a white picket fence and have a family, right? That's what I aligned myself to. And because I aligned myself with these like weird conceptions of like success and happiness, I was actually like really fucking unhappy, slash making like really unsafe choices, right? So I think when I read that in her Sister Citizens book, which if you haven't read Sister Citizen, please read it.
I
It's
will.
yeah, it's pretty brilliant. When I read that book and I learned about Crooked Room, I was like, oh Lord have mercy. Yes, this is yes. So although it's lies, right? You're like, this is ridiculous.
Mhm.
You align, you align with the bullshit because that's what we naturally want to do. And so again, although some people cannot, right? And so like what does it mean to like be field dependent? What does it mean that you have to align yourself around? And I kind of even see that in parallel parking. Hello, right? Like when someone is like does a really shitty job, the likelihood of your next, like person coming in right behind trying to parallel park because they're trying to adjust next to the other person, is like it's true. And so it kind of reminds me of that.
That makes so much sense. Yeah. I
I
mean,
I just talked about parallel parking, but yeah.
I mean, everybody, most people can relate to that.
Yeah,
So that makes sense. I feel like I've known about the crooked room theory, but I've never like seen it. And in your book, because it's a graphic memoir, you like do an excellent job of showing like you exactly
yeah,
what, you know, Dr. Harris Perry's talking about.
yeah.
Um, in the following or 2 pages after you explain, the crooked room theory, you talk about wearing your labels as your armor, and
Right.
I'm a huge advocate for wearing your labels as armor. Um, could you talk to us a little bit about how you do that, or like how you came to use your labels instead of it you say instead of wearing it as a heavy backpack, I choose to wear them as armor.
Yeah. I mean, in the same way that when I read Octavia Butler and she didn't wash away any of the trauma that came with the, slave trade,
Mhm.
colonial periods, she honored the shit out of all of that magic these enslaved folks came in with, right? Like that, like were in their bodies. That's the same way that I was taking in all of my different identities. Where I was like, well, why am I thinking about this as a negative? Although, because sometimes it just feels like a burden, right? Like sometimes
Mhm.
it feels very heavy because of all of the things that we've been told about ourselves, right? It feels very heavy. Um, but I've learned that there is more magic than heaviness, and
Mhm.
that I can choose to walk in my magic. And I say that to say that it is not easy. I don't do it every day confidently, right? But to know that it is not like I'm not a bag lady, like I'm not hunching down on myself. I have to like remind myself, and that's my community, right? We're all reminding each other, no, 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 you are magic, right? Like don't choose heaviness, don't choose to
Mhm.
carry with heaviness, choose to carry it as in like, no, 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 I display, there's a lot of magic here, right? So
Mhm.
although there might be, and in the same way, I think in the vein of the book, right, and in how I view life, there's a lot to be mad about and enraged about.
Mhm.
How do we process that so that I can productively address the thing, right? Rather than
Absolutely.
just be in that rage. And so I think that's where the armor metaphor, you know what I mean, or like visual came through, where I was like, yeah, at some point I'm like, nah, this is actually, I love that most of the time I say y'all, right? Like that my language is like, is that my language is professional, right? That this is
Mhm.
what I'm coming in with, that this is exciting, right? Like um that X amount of years working in the hood, community organizing is a hell of a lot of fucking experience. And that should also be in your resume, right? Like that's
Mhm.
something that I cannot teach you in school, right? That is only based off like experience and doing some down dirty work, right?
Absolutely.
That's the thing. So I think it's like, how are you choosing to shift the perspective without denying that it will be hard, and it will maybe not feel the same every day, but the more you choose armor, the more you can get through. The more you can not just get through, but you can identify difficult situations.
Absolutely. I also talk a little bit about like when I'm explaining to people about like wearing my identities on my sleeve or like as my armor. I like to think about like uh there's this term that we use in the queer community, flagging,
Mm,
and I feel like I'm like flagging to someone else to be
mm,
like, "You got this," basically, like,
mm.
"You can do this too," like, "I
Right.
am here for you," like, we are one and the same, not one and the same, but, like, we are in the same community, like, we're in the same
Right,
boat.
there's support, right? There's a space for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that you mentioned this in your book. I'm a huge advocate for doing that. Um, let me see what else I wrote here. That actually looks like we hit a lot of my discussion outline. That was a beautiful conversation. Do you want to, I'll open it up, sorry. Does anybody in the audience have any questions for Sharon before we go?
Yeah,
If you do, you can like type it in the comments, and we'll see it here. Whether you're on Facebook or Twitch or YouTube.
yeah. And thank you everyone for
Sometimes.
coming out.
Absolutely. All right, we'll give them a second
Yeah,
to, type if they're typing. Do you want to plug in any projects you're working on? Are you working on a second book? You don't have to share if you don't want
Yeah, yeah.
to.
No. I am. I am working on the second book. This time it is not about me, thank goodness. Um, I think I have had, I'll come back, but I've had enough for a little bit. It's not about me, or not at least directly about me. It is, I'm trying to work through, it's still about freedom. Funny.
Mm-hmm.
But it does have to do with two folks who are from the Black diaspora who go to the opposite country in search of freedom. Um,
Mm,
and they have more similarities than differences.
I
So,
love that.
so
So
that
keep your eyes peeled. I'm
yes,
so excited.
I'm excited about that because one, I think I've learned so much with making on my wild seed, and then like some other longer form comics that came afterwards. I think I feel ready to tackle, like, or at least I know what I'm tackling, right? Like I know what
Mm-hmm.
to expect, although this still feels really hard. And then also it's different because it's not my memoir necessarily. It does have to do with how how I've come to these two characters, right? Like how I've interacted with these two people's story, but it is not necessarily like my story. I'm not the centerpiece
Mm-hmm.
of all of this, and so that makes it exciting because it's different.
Yeah, for sure. You get to like create these characters,
Yeah.
which I'm sure is going to be much harder, but
Well, these characters actually are real characters. Interesting,
oh, okay.
real characters, but they are one I know personally, one is my stepdad, and then the other one I don't know personally, but is like an amazing person. I can't say yet,
Mm.
but
Okay,
um,
yeah, no
they,
problem. You don't
but
have to spill.
yeah, no, but they both, they're both real people. They're
Mhm.
both like have, yeah, they're just both real people who've gone through just a hell of a lot of trauma to escape their countries, and I'll call them rightfully like escape both
Mhm.
in search for freedom. And so I'm in this book, I'm just trying to think through the perspective of freedom and the compromises we make for freedom.
Mhm. Wow, I'm so excited to read that. I feel like I'm gonna cry because I already feel emotional right now thinking about my dad
Yeah.
escaping his country to come here.
What
Um, I'm from Brazil.
okay, okay. My
Yeah,
dad
so
is
it was like
yeah, my dad is from Cuba. So
oh, yeah.
yeah,
So, yeah, my dad, yeah, I'm excited for that.
yeah.
So it looks like we do have a question. Um, JC wants to know, what influenced your art style? JC is also an amazing artist.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for your question. Um, Definitely street art. Have been a muralist for a while, did a lot of like graffiti for a while. So a lot of like street art. I love color, right? Like I love
Mhm,
color. I love me a pop of color. I also love lines and messiness. So
mm,
sometimes, trying to be, I think I've like, since I'm a wild state, I think I've strategized better my lines, so that it doesn't look like a whole complete sketch, and it looks like a final thing. But I do love me like lines and more like erratic lines. So a little bit of like street art, graffiti, and then definitely just like the play in line work. I love.
mhm. Absolutely. But I feel like the line work is like your style. Like if I ever see like one of your like murals, I'd be like, "Oh, that like might be Sharon's mural." You know,
Yeah,
like it just has like without you signing it,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like your style, you know?
Thank you. That
Awesome.
means a lot.
Well, all right. It doesn't look like we have any questions, but if you want to like plug your website, your social media,
Yeah.
folks can purchase I'm a Wild Seed on Street Noise directly. I'm sure you can also find it. Um,
Bookshop.org is
but
amazing. And your
yes.
local bookshops, support
Mm-hmm.
independent bookshops. Um, yeah, I am SharonLeeDelaCruz.com. That's very long. God bless us all, but you can type it .com, and you can see actually other like short form comics that I have there, and just some other work because I do other work in other mediums. Just it's been primarily comics for the last couple of years.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this was a wonderful conversation. I'm so happy I got to meet you. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk with us. And thank you for this beautiful piece of literature and art that I'm going to have forever.
Oh, thank you. This seriously means a lot. This was a hard book. I was very scared. I was like, what did I get into? Am I even an author? Can I write anything? And so it just makes me happy to be able to just keep writing and keep making books because I know what they've done for me. And I just hope to, yeah, create more joyful resistance for you.
Hmm.
So thank you.
Absolutely. And I'm sure just as much as you've inspired me, you're going to inspire a ton of folks who read this book. So get yourself a copy of I'm a Wild Seed. Thank
Thank
you so much,
you.
Sharon. Have a
Yes.
great night.